Just very briefly, I'd like to introduce you to our digital map. This map gives you a brief overview of the online gaming regulation throughout Europe. This is a map that the Norwegian Gaming Authority has developed using a program called Maps Alive. The idea came in conjunction with a remote gaming report, an overview of the legal status of online gambling in Norway, and with eyes on Europe and the EU. Many different people have developed maps similar to this one. However, we have yet not seen anyone develop an interactive map where you can actually click on the country you would like to know more about. As you can see, we've set up different color codes for the different categories of regulation on online gaming. Light blue meaning the monopoly, blue for license system, dark blue for prohibited, gray combination, green uncertain, or we don't have enough information. We plan to keep this map updated based on our understanding of the regulation in Europe at all times, together with the information feedback we receive from all of you. So if you spot mistakes, errors, misinterpretations, or anything else on our digital map, please don't hesitate to let us know. We will check it out and update it immediately. Just to show you quickly how it works, I'm now looking at Norway. Information is over here. Also, going down here, you can find the link to the Norwegian Gaming Authority as the authority for the regulation, and also to our Internet Gambling Report, which is available in English. If you'd like to see the other countries, you could either click straight onto the map or open this one and go, for instance, to Spain. Or you could go here and press Russia. So, for anyone wanting to explore this, please feel free. It's on our website. Thank you.
Then, the floor is yours, Harrie Temmink.
Thank you very much. Is this working? It's working. Thanks, and thanks for staying here with me. I'm afraid I have to start with bad news, and that is that my presentation will not be as expressive as the presentation of the two previous speakers of Norsk, Norsk Tipping, because I'm a civil servant from the European Commission, and we are not supposed to be sort of dynamic and expressive, and we are supposed to do our job properly. So I have a very boring presentation, but I hope nevertheless that in this session you will learn more about what the European Commission and the European Union in general is doing about all these, well, challenges, threats, opportunities that actually were mentioned in the previous presentation. To start with a sort of a general introduction, because I understand that some of the delegates here are not from the EU. And we talk about the European Union, there are several institutions that you need to identify, to distinguish. I'm working for the European Commission, and the role of the European Commission is actually to develop policy, to propose rules, regulations, on the one hand, and on the other hand, to control that these rules are actually respected by the member states, by the 28 member states, 28 countries that form the European Union. On the other hand, we have the Council of the European Union representing the member states, and we have the European Parliament. Now, the Parliament and the Council together are the ones who are adopting the rules at EU level. And then we have a Court of Justice. This is a sort of a constitutional court that is controlling that all the rules are respected, including by the institutions. So the Commission is sort of the executive arm of the EU, and I'm working for that executive arm. And we, as European Commission, we have launched last year, October last year, almost a year ago now, an action plan on online gambling. And I will explain to you why we have made that action plan, what it says, and where we are 1 year later in the transposition of that action plan. So if I can find now my... Yeah. So first of all, obviously, why is the EU in any case dealing with gambling? That is not how it used to be. For almost 50 years, there was hardly any interference of the European Union in the area of gambling. Gambling was considered to be a national thing, a thing of the member states, where the EU should not stick its nose in. But, as we have heard in the previous presentations, it has actually been the development of online gambling that has changed the whole landscape, not only in the EU, but also outside the EU. Online gambling is a fast-developing market. I'm not even giving you details about that, only that for the time being, in the EU, it's about 50% of the overall gambling market that is related to remote or online gambling, which is about 13 billion. But obviously, the expectation is that this figure will go up fastly. We have now around 7 million consumers online, 7 million citizens of the EU playing online out of around 500 million citizens. And obviously you understand perfectly as regulator what the main issue is. The main issue is that we have consumers, citizens, that are playing online not only with operators under your jurisdiction, but also with operators outside your jurisdiction. And on the other hand, we have operators that can actually offer their services not only in your jurisdiction, but throughout the world. So that is, in essence, what makes the European Commission come in. Because online gambling is a global phenomenon. And it is an illusion to think that it can be exclusively dealt with at national level. And online gambling, just to have one punchline, online gambling is not a fashion, it's not a trend, it's hard reality, and it's something that will stay. And for that reason, the European Commission is almost exclusively focusing on the developments in the area of online gambling when it is dealing with gambling. Now, this is also a slide that, at least in the beginning, sounds quite logical. So, what we see in the member states is actually that each member state or each jurisdiction is trying to deal with this phenomenon of online gambling in its own way. Underlying all the policy objectives are similar concerns. And these concerns can be categorized in two groups. On the one hand, we have the concern for the welfare of the citizen, protection of the consumer, protection of minors, protection of vulnerable groups, protection against addiction. On the other hand, we see that there is a concern within the society, the protection against fraud, protection against money laundering, and even the protection against terrorism, where, for example, revenues are channeled towards illegal activities like terrorism. So there are public interest objectives underlying everything that the member states are doing, everything that each jurisdiction is doing. And what we see in the member states is that an overall idea is that the best way to fight against illegal or unauthorized gambling is actually to channel your citizens from illegal offer to legal offer. And legal offer meaning offer that you can control, offer that you can regulate and control. So that is underlying the activities of each of the member states of the EU. Now, as we have seen also previously, many member states have chosen to open up their markets, therefore, for remote gambling. And since there is a market, there is interest from operators to enter that market. And where there is an interest of operator to enter any marketplace, there's also frustration if an operator cannot properly enter the market or can only enter the market with restrictions that it does not suit him or her. So what we see is that there is, despite the fact that member states are modernizing their gambling laws, in particular in view of online gambling, what we see is that more and more operators, and particularly commercial operators, are complaining about the fact that they do not get proper access to a certain online gambling market. And that is where the EU comes into play. These complaints of basically commercial operators are expressed in front of national courts, which then pose questions to the EU Constitutional Court and the Court of Justice on the one hand, and on the other hand, these complaints come to us, the European Commission, as guardian of the EU rules, as guardian of the treaties. And we see that the Court of Justice of the EU has developed case law on the way that national regulators can deal with the rules on online gambling. There are about 25 judgments now of the Court of Justice, and I must summarize quickly for you this case law of the Court of Justice because it's fundamental to understand actually our action plan. So, overall, there is an internal market in the EU. It is an area without internal frontiers where there is a free movement of goods, persons, services, and capital. And in this particular case, it's the freedom of establishment and the freedom to provide services between member states that is the basis. And the Court of Justice, first of all, has made clear that gambling, including online gambling, is an economic activity and hence falls under these fundamental freedoms, these economic freedoms of the EU treaties. However, the Court of Justice has also stated that gambling is different from other economic activities in the sense that it has specific characteristics, particularly when it comes to online gambling. And that means that the Court of Justice has said, on the one hand, that member states are free to regulate their gambling business, their gambling activities. Member states can decide to have a ban. Member states can decide to have a monopoly, whether it's a legal monopoly or a monopoly for a commercial operator. And a member state can decide actually to have a license system. It's not up to the EU to decide what choice a member state has to make. Member states are free to organize gambling the way they want. However, if there is a choice for particularly a monopoly on the one hand or a license system on the other hand, then there are certain conditions imposed by the Court of Justice. And these conditions are linked to the objectives that you want to achieve with regulating online gambling. You remember these two categories: protection of citizens on the one hand, protection of society on the other hand. And particularly when there is a monopoly, the Court of Justice has stated that a monopoly is allowed, but only if there is a strict state control, in order to control genuinely that these objectives of protecting the consumer and protecting society in practice are a reality. It should not be a fake public policy objective, it should be a true public policy objective. And that is linked to a second condition for monopolies, and that is that there should be coherence in the overall gambling policy. And that means in particular that if you have a monopoly, as a member state which is fully allowed, that monopoly should, for example, not have an aggressive commercial policy. Because if you have a policy of developing new products, very dangerous perhaps in view of addiction, or you have too much publicity, then obviously your public policy objectives of protecting the citizens against the negative side, the negative effects of gambling, becomes a bit of an illusion. And that is not allowed under EU rules. So that it's when it comes to a monopoly. When it comes to a licensing system, on the other hand, the rules are more that, okay, if you allow several operators on the market, you cannot discriminate these operators on the basis of the origin. In other words, you cannot give beneficial treatment to your domestic operators in your jurisdiction to the detriment of the operators coming from other member states, right? And also, important rule, when there is a license system, then the member state should make very clear what the conditions are in order to get the license. That's the principle of transparency, which are basically rules that apply in the area of public procurement, not only in the EU, but anywhere in the world. So this is the case law of the Court of Justice that has been developed on the basis of all these complaints about the regulatory regimes in all the member states, or at least those member states that have regulated online gambling. And all these complaints that were pouring in with the Commission, and all these judgments of the Court of Justice, and all this talking about this phenomenon of online gambling being developed, revolutionary, has led the Commission actually to launch a public consultation in 2011, where we basically asked anyone interested, the operators, the member states, consumer organizations, anyone who has an interest in the area of gambling, what do you think that the EU should do? What do you think that the European Commission should do? And we got about 260 responses. And those responses are the basis of our action plan. And these responses have learned us the following in terms of feedback. First of all, open door. Gambling is harmful if it is not regulated. Secondly, there are particularly challenges, sometimes opportunities, but I prefer to use the word challenges, to public policy objectives in a cross-border environment. Thirdly, there is a unanimous call on the EU for action. Something needed to be done. And finally, whatever we are doing as an EU, there is not enough support, at least not at this stage, for the EU to come up with sector-specific legislation, as exists in other areas of the economy, for example, for the telecom world, or the energy world, or the postal world, or even when it comes to the free movement of toys in the EU, there is always a rule to achieve an internal market. Well, we learn from the responses that there is simply not enough appetite out there that says, please, EU, please, European Commission, come forward with legislation to regulate the gambling market or the online gambling market. So for the time being, that is a no-go zone. Now, what we are doing, actually, we described in this action plan that was adopted on the 23rd of October last year. It's a communication, that's a technical word. It's basically an action plan. Communication has around 12, 13 pages. There is a staff working document which explains more in detail what we are doing. I always recommend to read the staff working document. It learns you a lot about the situation in the EU. And it is an action plan with 5 priority areas. No legislative sector-specific proposals. We are not proposing harmonization or unification of the gambling laws in the EU. Instead, we are having a mix of initiatives covering a range of issues. Now, these are the issues in a nutshell. I will first enumerate them quickly, and then I go to some detail on each of them. So first of all, the compliance of national regulatory frameworks with EU law. Don't forget, we are the European Commission. It's our role to safeguard that everyone in the EU is actually meeting the obligations under the EU treaties, in particular the member states. So that's the first priority area that we have. The second one, very important, enhancing administrative cooperation. Administrative cooperation between the regulators of the EU, and also to enhance an efficient enforcement of national law. Compliance with national law is one of the key actions of our action plan. I'll come to that in a minute. Thirdly, protection of citizens, protection of consumers, minors, and vulnerable groups. We have some initiatives there, which I will explain in a minute. Fourthly, preventing fraud and money laundering. These public policy objectives I referred to before. And finally, safeguarding the integrity of sports and preventing match fixing, in particular in the area of betting related to match fixing. I'll come to that in a second. So let's go now one by one to all these initiatives. First of all, compliance of national regulatory frameworks with EU law. Now, only very quickly here. You must understand that we have now around, I lost track. I think we have around between 80 and 100 complaints against 20 member states of the EU. All complaints which are registered at the European Commission. And what we have done last year, after the adoption of the action plan, is actually to write letters to all of these member states, asking them, okay, we have complaints about your system. Can you please tell us where you are with the modernization of your legislation or the implementation of the rules that you have already in place? So we got feedback from all the member states. And we started, of course, first you have to translate all this feedback. This is the European Union. We have 24 official languages. So we had to translate it first, and then we started analyzing all these responses from the member states. And we have decided actually to categorize all the issues internally. And this is not what you find in public documents. This is what we did internally. We started to categorize the issues on the basis of the case law of the Court of Justice. So in terms of monopolies, in terms of licensing system, the conditions for licensing in particular, what is allowed according to the court, what is not allowed. And on that basis, we are now finalizing this work, and we will soon, and the word soon for a civil servant is obviously a relative thing. It could be in the next weeks, could also be next month. But I hope that we will have sort of a package of decisions before the end of this year. Let's make it very broad, but hopefully much quicker than that. By the way, you see letters sent out to 70 member states. That's because on 3 member states we have not yet sent out these letters, technically. So we will take decisions as a European Commission on all these complaints. And what would these decisions be? Can be several. Oh, I mean, potentially there are several options here. First of all, we can decide to go to a next stage in an infringement procedure, sending out letters of formal notice, or where we already started an infringement case years ago, before we started to freeze all these infringement cases, to go to the next step in an infringement case, reasoned opinion, or a referral to the Court of Justice. So that's one option. There we are unhappy. Commission is unhappy. We go to the next stage. The second decision is that we are very happy with the response of the member state, and we believe that there is no infringement of EU law, and then we're going to close the case. Against certain member states, we will close all cases, or at least part of the cases. A third option is that we say, thanks for the response, but we still have additional questions. So then we pose additional questions. And fourthly, we can also say, okay, we have complaints about the system of a certain member state, but the member state is in the process of making changes already. So we are not going to close the case because you need to have a big stick, but we're also not going to the next stage in the infringement procedure. We just wait and see what happens for the coming month. So there will hopefully soon be a package of decisions that the Commission will take. And then hopefully we will get rid of a lot of these complaints. Although I must already say here that this is an ongoing process. It is not that one day we click a button and then all the infringement cases or all the compliance cases are over. This will continue to exist, except that we will not have this avalanche of complaints anymore, hopefully, that we have seen in the past. Right? Okay, so this is compliance EU law, which is relevant for regulators, I think, within the EU, but also outside the EU, at least for their knowledge. Then the second part, second key priority area, which is, for the Commission, absolutely crucial, and that is a better administrative cooperation amongst the regulators in the EU. We believe that regulators in the EU should speak more together with each other, and they should speak better together. For reasons that I don't need to explain more in detail. So what have we done? Well, first of all, we have created an expert group on gambling services on the 5th of December last year. So there is an expert group of regulators composed of 2 members per member state. So each member state has the right to send 2 representatives to this expert group. And the task of the expert group is twofold. First of all, the expert group is advising the European Commission on the rest of its policy initiatives. It's an ordinary advisory board. What we are doing, or what we want to do, we share that with the expert group and ask their opinion. That's one objective. The other objective is equally important, and that is that we want actually that regulators exchange best practices, exchange information about how they deal with these challenges, in particular in the area of online gambling. So in that sense, it is something not between the regulators and the Commission, but more amongst the regulators. The European Commission is not a regulator in the strict sense. We are not a gambling regulator. We are a facilitator. We are in this game of the expert group, we are sort of an honest broker, if you want to. We want others actually to speak better with each other. And that should, at the end of the day, end up in a sort of a charter, a memorandum of understanding, but something tangible that would apply then, hopefully, to all the regulators in the European Union. And we're making progress in that. We have had so far 4 meetings. The 5th one is scheduled for the 23rd or the 24th of October. And just to give an impression of what we are discussing, obviously we are discussing, as I said already, the initiatives that we are having in the area of consumer protection and responsible advertising. We are having, when it comes to exchange of information amongst regulators, we have created a database with the legislation, the rules of all the jurisdictions of the EU and even of jurisdictions outside the EU. It's a virtual library, and I refer now to, oh, no, she's gone. I refer now to what the Norwegians have made, this virtual map of the EU with details of the regulators and the gambling situation in all the member states. Well, what we have created now goes into much more detail. All the rules that apply, sector-specific rules, but also rules on, for example, money laundering or consumer rules in general, tax rules. They can all be found in this virtual library that is called Circa. And of course, not all the member states have uploaded the necessary information yet, but we're making good progress on that. And that's actually a first step for enhanced administrative cooperation. Information. Information is key. Now, before you ask me the question, I'm not a regulator of the EU. Can I have access to this virtual library? I have to do 2 things. I have to say 2 things. First of all, the answer is formally no. Why not? Because Circa, this virtual library, is a tool of the European Commission. It's a sort of a communication tool between the Commission and the member states, and it's privileged information, so to speak, although there is no secret hidden in this virtual library. But unfortunately, those from outside the EU, non-regulators, those who are not in the expert group, cannot have access. So that is my first remark, which is negative. But the positive news is that as long as I'm here, I will do everything to make that information one day available for everyone, right? Because obviously, it's not only that the regulators can benefit from this virtual library, which doesn't exist anywhere, but at some point, each interested party should have access to this information. Of course, this is not something that can happen from one day to another. Again, the information that is uploaded is public information. It should be public information. So for the time being, Be patient. At some point in future, I hope that we can make all this information available for all citizens of the world. So that's the virtual library, which is an exchange of information, which is nice. But it is not yet what you really want between regulators. When one regulator has a question about an operator that is established in another member state, then obviously one could imagine that you would like to have more information about the credibility of the persons behind that operator, for example, the integrity of the operator. Well, what you need then is an exchange of information of personal data. And here we have a little problem in the EU, and that is that it is not allowed, just like that, to exchange personal information, not even about license holder established in one member state towards towards regulators in another member state. Exchange of information would be very helpful when it is related to the credibility of operators. However, if we want to regulate that in the EU, if we want to arrange that in the EU, we need to adapt legislation. And I said before already, legislation is not what we are proposing at this stage, but we hope at some point in the future that we will pass that hurdle and that we will be able to create a mechanism amongst the regulators in Europe that is not limited to an exchange of information on their laws and their practices, but also an exchange of information on personal data of operators. It's work for the future. It will not happen this year, it will not happen next year, but this is our aim at some point, let's say, well, between now and 5 years, I would say. Right? Okay. So far, so good. Now, what about this compliance with national law? That is part of the administrative cooperation. Part of the administrative cooperation. What we do in this expert group is that we invite 1 or 2 member states now every time to explain what enforcement measure, what compliance measures they have, not only which rules there are in place, but also the practices underlying the rules. Because one thing is that you have a rule, another thing is that how do you control these rules? How do you monitor these rules? How do you efficiently comply these rules? And that's the exchange of information that we have. And we will do so further in the future. We do believe as a European Commission that preventive enforcement measures, awareness, education is very important, but also responsive enforcement measures are important. But when you talk about responsive enforcement measures, then you talk about things like limiting access from unauthorized operators to your citizens. It's limiting access online. It's about blocking websites. It's also, for example, about limitation of financial transactions. And Norway is one of the leading countries here. Since 2010, there is a prohibition for financial intermediaries to facilitate financial transactions vis-à-vis unauthorized gambling operators between Norwegian citizens and operators normally established in other member states or outside the EU. Blocking payments, it is called. So blocking websites, blocking payments, we are, as a European Commission, very much interested in these issues. But we are not going to harmonize these things because that would be far a bridge too far for several reasons. First reason is that no one asked us to do so. In the responses, yes, some asked us to do so, but there is not a majority for legislative action. I just told you before. That's one thing, but on the other hand, there is also quite some debate about the effectiveness of responsive enforcement measures. Going back to Norway, the Norwegian example of blocking financial transactions, there is a report beginning of 2012, translated into the English language. Thank you very much, Norwegian delegation. We read that with much interest. What we learned actually from that report is that yes, it has had a certain positive impact, but perhaps not as positive as one might hope for. And there are ways actually to deviate this law, this blocking payment law. Now, we want to know much more about these initiatives. At some point, we will invite, there he is, the Norwegian delegation actually to explain to the rest of the EU how it goes with the blocking payment legislation in this country. We're interested in that. But we, as a European Commission, we are not going to regulate these things. Yeah? So that about responsive enforcement measures, which I think I should pay attention to because you're all regulators and all dealing with compliance with national law. All right, for those of you, by the way, interested in the expert group, the composition, the tasks, everything, it's available online, it's available on our website. Even the minutes of the meetings are available for the public. Just the very last slide, you see a reference to the website for your information. Okay, I will skip the part on notice and action because it is dealing with an initiative that we, European Commission even, or unit, my unit, is preparing. Notice and action is dealing with the following. A company like Facebook is hosting an activity, hosting a gaming activity or a gambling activity even, which might be illegal. Then obviously the idea is that if there is an interested party notifying the hosting provider, the intermediary, the Facebooks or the Googles or the YouTubes of this world, that there is an illegal activity ongoing because the gambling is unauthorized in your country. That's the notification that you as a public regulator or even a private company can make towards the hosting intermediary. If you notify that, then there is an obligation for the intermediary to take it down, to remove that illegal website, to remove that illegal information. And if not, then the intermediary can be held liable for the negative consequences of that illegal content. So that's notice on the one hand, action or non-action on the other hand. We are preparing an initiative at the level of the European Commission, which is linked to the so-called e-commerce directive. We have worked really hard over the last year to come forward with a decent proposal. It is not easy to regulate the online environment. I hope that still by the end of this year we will have tangible results of this initiative. Initially, and it is no secret, we wanted to propose a legislative instrument, a directive actually, to deal with notice and action procedures, not only in the area of gambling, by the way, but also in the area of illegal sales of medicines, pirated products, counterfeited products. It's a horizontal initiative. But as I said, it is not easy, and we will see what comes out of this at the end of the day. Okay, finally, under this second key initiative, or key priority on administrative cooperation, regulatory dialogue with third countries. That's something that we would like to discuss within the expert group, but also as a European Commission, we want to increase our dialogues with third countries when it comes to gambling and online gambling in particular. Okay, over the last year, we haven't been able to do much, but for the future, this will become a more important issue, because as we said before, there is no way that you can do things alone. It's best actually to have a dialogue with anyone in the world dealing with online gambling. Okay, now I will go a little bit faster now through the rest of the issues. The third issue is protection of consumers and citizens. Well, there is strong support, not only that we learned from the public consultation of 2011, but also what we learned from the European Parliament. There is strong support for the European Commission to do something about the protection of citizens. Although, on the one hand, each member state is setting its rules to protect citizens, to protect consumers, to protect vulnerable groups, what we see on the other hand is that these rules are very different, maybe very different, and sometimes even inadequate in the member states. And that is why we are preparing a recommendation on common consumer rules. A recommendation is a non-binding instrument. It's an instrument that member states can not follow. It's a recommendation, but we hope that member states will follow them. And what is the aim? Well, the aim is very simple. We want actually that consumers are channeled towards legalized offers in a safe environment where we protect the vulnerable groups and where we prevent gaming disorders. And how should that look like? Well, I mean, you are regulators, you are aware of these rules. Rules on registration and identification tools, and the age verification mechanisms, time and deposit limits, information on websites, help desks, for example, protection of minors, specific rules for the protection of minors, and of course, reality checks, the exclusion of players, the cooling down periods, sanctions. All these issues are now being discussed in view of the adoption of this non-binding instrument in the foreseeable future. This is the recommendation on consumer protection. We also have one that we prepare on responsible advertising, which is a bit linked, of course. Responsible advertising, what information can be given and cannot be given in advertising. What about bonuses, for example? What about misleading advertising? For example, indicate that it is a game of skill where it is exclusively a game of chance, or when the citizen is confronted with completely unrealistic awards. Aggressive advertising, for example, in direct marketing towards those players who are self-excluded, have indicated that they want to be self-excluded, for example. Protection of minors, sponsorship, which is a very delicate issue, the sponsorship rules, merchandising, and of course also the issue of supervision and enforcement, which is dealt with differently in the member states. Sometimes it's more done on a private basis, sometimes it's more done on a public basis. Sometimes the marketing plan of operators already need to be presented as part of getting a license. Sometimes the control is more repressive. There are different rules, different circumstances in the EU, and we try to find a robust level of protection for the citizens with these two recommendations. We are discussing the content not only with the expert group, but also in workshops and bilaterally with operators. And we hope that all this will come to a tangible result in the first quarter of 2014. I should also mention in this context the studies that the Commission is conducting. We do a lot of study, and a lot of these studies may not be so well known, but they are crucial for your work as a regulator. I will mention only two. There is one study that's part of a big research project which is called Alice RAP. Sounds very exciting, but it is really about addictions in modern life. It's about alcoholism, tobacco addiction, but there is a strand of work now dealing also with gambling addiction. It's basically dealing with definitions, with the determinants of addiction. It's more of a, I would say, an academic type of study, but still very important to set the parameters for research in the future. So that's the ALICE REP. You read all about it actually in the staff working document accompanying the action plan. And there is another one, a study which I personally like very much, which is a behavioral study. Behavioral study where we have asked the contractor not so much about what rules are in place and etc., but the question is more, and so you have a rule, does it really work? Does it really work? For example, icons on a website indicating that there is a help desk. Is that really having an effect on the behavior of an individual player or not? And what the contractor is doing is it creates a laboratory situation. Real people are confronted with real websites and real consumer protection measures, and the contractor is trying to find out what works best and what works less than you might expect. And again, the contractor is now finalizing its work. We hope to have initial results already in a couple of weeks' time, results which we will obviously share with the members of the expert group, and results that hopefully at some point will also become available for the big public. But it goes without saying that all these studies are feeding the work of the preparation of these recommendations. Okay, well, I'll leave out other examples of studies because, well, just I refer to the staff working document accompanying the action plan. There you can find more details on, for example, specific studies on the protection of minors. Now, the four last key priority area is preventing fraud and money laundering. Credit card fraud, theft of banking credential. We understand from the public consultation that those are amongst the most common examples of fraud. We are having actually an EU legislative initiative coming up on e-identification. This is a proposal for a directive of the European Commission which is currently being discussed in the Council and in the European Parliament. It's not sector-specific for gambling, but it is just horizontal. It's on the safety of financial transactions, and any other transaction with banking credentials. So that's one initiative where we do come up with legislation, except it's not sector-specific. And the other one that is very important in this context is the example of the revision of the Anti-Money Laundering Directive. Now, the current directive is already dealing with a game of chance, but only with casinos, online, offline. So money laundering related to casinos is already regulated in the EU with this minimum harmonization directive, the Anti-Money Laundering Directive, which lays down a minimum threshold throughout the EU. Now, the European Commission has proposed on the 5th of February of this year to extend the scope of this directive and to include all games of chance, including betting, but also lotteries, and poker, which we define as a game of chance, although it could be partly seen as a game of skill. Under the definition that we included, it is to be considered as a game of chance. And, well, of course, when you fall under the directive, the rules of money laundering that are laid down in the directive have to be followed. I will not go into detail. Negotiations are ongoing in the Council and in the Parliament on this. It looks like there is overall support to include indeed this extension of the scope of the directive. But obviously, we may have to fine-tune some of the proposals that we have in our directive. For example, when the stake is very, very minor, the question is, do you need to have all these rules on money laundering applying when there is hardly any risk that there is an issue of money laundering? Exploration of an EU standard on gambling equipment, including gambling software, which is, as it says, exploring the need for it. That's what we are doing right now. Still in its infancy, we haven't done much work there yet, but hopefully that work will be accelerated next year. And of course, we urge member states training of the judiciary on fraud and money laundering, gambling-related issues. But that's a recommendation to the member states. We do not have particular initiatives at EU level, particularly related to gambling. Okay, finally then, but very briefly, safeguarding sport integrity and preventing match fixing. It's not that I want to say that we as a European Commission, we consider sport integrity and preventing match fixing as less relevant or less important. On the contrary, throughout the Commission there are several services working on sport integrity and match fixing and the fight against it, of course. I think we all agree, and if I say we, I mean I think in the whole world we agree that more should be done to fight against match fixing, that the betting industry and the betting regulator play an important role. We had a breakout session yesterday on this issue. And what the European Commission technically and hands-on is doing now, first of all, is to support the work in the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe is working on a convention on the manipulation of sport results, which is the official name, and part of it is on betting. And the European Commission is actively participating in the debates in another international organization, and the Council of Europe, which is not the European Union. Sorry for those who are not from the EU. But still we are participating in that initiative where we will hopefully get results by mid-next year. And once we have the results of that convention, then the European Commission will reactivate its internal work, and we will start with a recommendation on best practices to prevent and combating betting related to match fixing, which is, one could say, the Convention of Europe Plus. Because obviously we will not repeat what is in the Convention of Europe, or a Convention of the Council of Europe. We will go beyond that when it comes to cooperation amongst regulators, when it comes to information requirements of betting organizations, but also when it comes to the relations with third countries. We will certainly go beyond what is in the Council of Europe initiative. It's too soon to tell how it would look like, but we're following it closely. And of course, promotion of international cooperation and dialogue is one of these important issues. Okay, member states urge to set up contact points, equip national systems, and consider sustainable financing for sport integrity. Of course, good causes should be unaffected, but that's the priority of the member states, not of the European Union. It's up to the member states to decide how much money from betting they want to give to good causes. It's not up to the EU to decide what member states have to do that. Right. Now, institutional responses. The Council, which is the Council of Ministers, which is actually the representatives of the member states, well, they have not given us any feedback on our action plan. I can tell you why. It's a highly sensitive issue in the Council, and the best way sometimes is to be silent then. On the other hand, the European Parliament has adopted a resolution on the 10th of September 2013 with the rapporteur, Mr. Fox, UK MEP. Well, basically positive. I will say, of course, a representative of the European Commission, that the Parliament is basically supporting what we are doing. It's supporting our work on consumer protection and responsible advertising. It's definitely supporting our work on administrative cooperation. Parliament came up with some own ideas, for example, to have an EU-wide register of self-excluded players. Interesting proposal. We will see what we can do with it. So overall, a good response from the European Parliament vis-à-vis the action plan of the Commission. Also, the Economic and Social Committee, which is an advisory committee of the EU, adopted an opinion on the 22nd of May 2013. there I would say as well, we got overall positive response from that advisory committee as well, though they felt it was a pity that we did not come up with legislative rules on the protection of consumers. And that's it. Thank you. I'm sorry if I was a bit longer than I expected, but thank you for your attention, and obviously I'm here for any question you may have.
Very interesting, Harrie Temmink. I would like to know, in this room, how many is in this expert group, is working in the expert group? Could you raise your hands? A lot of you. I would like to, could you share with us some thoughts about how this is working? Does anyone want to do that?
If you want to, I'll leave the floor and just go somewhere else, and then you can.
Rolf Sims, from the Norwegian Ministry of Culture. Please share your experience as a member of the expert group.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a good presentation, Harrie. We're very positive that the Commission has taken the initiative to look at online gambling. I mean, the last 2 days we've been reminded of the global aspects of online gambling. We have to look at it at an international level. But I think the whole success of your action plan is that there has to be a respect of the principle of subsidiarity in the European Union, that member states can regulate their markets themselves, and there should be no attempts to harmonize the gambling sector within the EU. We have to acknowledge the fact that this is a highly political sensitive area. If you like it or not, that's the way it is. This is politics. One observation I've made in the expert group is, and also in Europe in general, we saw the map which the Norwegian Gaming Authority has drawn up. A lot of countries do regulate online gambling, but very few regulate on a full scale with all sorts of games. Like in Norway, for example, we've had sports betting online since 2001, but we have no experience when it comes to regulating interactive gaming. That will happen during the course of this year, and next year we will probably obtain more information on the regulation of interactive gambling. And I think over the next 5 years, every single jurisdiction in the European Union will actively address regulating interactive gambling. And I think we'll probably see more of the common denominators in the future and the issues of a common nature. Another issue, which I think all jurisdictions are probably most preoccupied about, is illegal gambling. And every jurisdiction, every regulator is preoccupied about how to enforce national laws and how to supervise domestic markets. And it's all in well that we draw up recommendations for consumer protection and advertising, but at the end of the day, we don't solve the problem that gambling is offered as a cross-border service inside the European Union, often in breach of national laws. Thank you.
Anyone else would like to share and comment on their work? Okay, I'm going to talk to Morten Ronde, who is Chief Executive of the Danish Online Gambling Association. Was that right? Good.
Thank you, and I represent the online operators. So, you mentioned in your presentation how match fixing is an important issue that you're going to address later, and you also mentioned the Fox report, and before that was the Kreutzmann report, and in those reports there are comments about financing of sports, and I believe that there are some recommendations to look further into this. Can you tell us whether you see this being in the scope of the work that you're going to initiate with the European Commission?
Yes. First of all, European Commission is conducting a study in this area. When there is an issue, we normally try to find somewhere a budget, and we just organize a study. So there is a study about this issue that is conducted through our colleagues from IAGR, which is the Ministry of Sport, so to speak, of the European Commission. So we wait first for the outcome of this study. But I think, irrespective of the outcome, I would not expect too much coming out of this, because when it comes to the destination of national money, the European Commission has enough to do in many areas with that, and I don't think that we would be particularly keen actually to discuss this issue, let's say, in the regulatory framework at EU level. So we're doing a study on it on the one hand, but don't have much expectations on regulating this on the other hand.
Any questions?
Good morning. I'm Nick Toffelock from the Gambling Commission of Great Britain, and it was a question on the issue of match fixing. You say that you're working with the Commission of Europe, the Council of Europe, I'm getting mixed up now, the Council of Europe as a fully accredited delegate, and actually we sit next to that Commission delegation. My question is around what appears to be a possible conflict in that the Council of Europe seems to want to be forceful or determined in the language that the Convention eventually uses. And yet the EU Commission have entered a reservation on the basis of harmonisation when the words shall or must appear, particularly when it comes to the roles of regulators. It's not so much a question but an observation. It seems to me that this could be one of the major difficulties that the Convention has in reaching its conclusion if the EU and the Commission and the Council of Europe can't agree on what exactly harmonisation is in the context of a convention. I hope that makes sense. It's a need to engage not just upon the detail of the convention, but the meaning of the words in the different contexts. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, what I can say about this is, first of all, that the Commission representatives are participating in the work of the Council of Europe, but we're not a contracting party of the Council of Europe. We are not a member state of the Council of Europe. We are just there as an observer, so to speak. And we are there with a mandate that has been given to us by the Council of Ministers. So we're working on the basis of that mandate. And that mandate is very clear towards the Commission. We only have to see whether, with whatever the Council of Europe is preparing, is meeting the requirements of the EU, in particular of the case law of the Court of Justice. So that's the limitation that we have. I don't think that our role goes beyond that, although some might believe it is. But our role is rather limited, I think, in these negotiations. However, with our know-how, we are actively assisting the Secretariat of the Council of Europe and also the delegations, actually, to come forward with, at the end of the day, piece of work, a convention that is robust, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. And whether the word harmonization is in or out or whatever, I mean, we will see at the end of the day how the text looks like. We'll also see at the end of the day if the EU is given the opportunity to adhere to this convention, which is technically possible. And then, of course, it would become part of the obligations of the EU. But I think it's a bit premature now to talk about the end results. We are discussing the text, as you know very well, because you're sitting next to the delegation of the European Commission. There is part which is more related to, let's say, the sanctions, the criminal law part, so to speak. And there is a part of it which is more related to betting and the obligation of operators and the responsibilities of regulators. But let's not prejudge the outcome of these discussions. We, as the European Commission, are positive about the work of the Council of Europe.
I have a question for Morten Ronde. As a representative for the online gaming industry, what are your expectations to this?
That was a wide question. Well, I guess yes. I guess that the expectations were not that high from the industry. We would have liked to see more initiatives in direction of harmonization rather than mere cooperation. But that said, I certainly hope that something good will come out of the negotiations in the expert group and with the action plan and if sort of inside the group of regulators, positive negotiations could lead perhaps to more work in the work of non-duplication of regulatory controls. That'd be a great benefit for the industry and more commonality in technical standards would be a major benefit for the industry as well.
Thank you. One more question.
Hello. My name is Abu Baker. I'm a member of the National Gambling Board of South Africa. That was a very dynamic presentation, even for a civil servant. What I want to say is that we are on the verge of introducing online gambling in South Africa. And what I was interested in was the distinction which you drew between monopolies and operators, mainly multiple operators being issued licenses. What we want to achieve in South Africa is a regulated online gambling industry where we don't overstimulate the urge to gamble. And I just wanted your views on whether that can be best achieved in a situation where there's a monopoly, where the state, in fact, controls the operator, rather than in instances where there's multiple licenses issued, where those persons would have an interest in maximizing revenue rather than public policy considerations. What's your view on that?
It's not an easy question. Eh? I will disappoint you with my answer. I do believe that it is not whether one system is better than the other. The system itself, the rules itself, I don't think in reality that makes a difference. It's the difference whether these rules are applied in practice seriously or not. So we have examples in Europe of monopolies where we see a very strict control of the monopoly holder, where we see a very coherent policy at national level, also when it comes to games of chance which may not be under the ambit of the monopolist, where we see that gambling addiction is not increasing but stabilizing or getting less, then of course monopoly works perfectly. But we can say the same about licensing systems. And there are, of course, countries in Europe where a licensing system really channels citizens from illegal websites to legal websites. And provided that you control the license holder properly, that can work equally well. It depends sometimes on the culture of a country, on the organization of the state even. And we as European Commission, as I tried to explain, we respect that choice of the member state. I would advise you to speak with, on one hand, with countries where they have a monopoly system, believed to work properly, and on the other hand, with countries with a licensing system believed to work properly. And then you can make your own choice. But it's not up to the Commission actually to say what works best, because in practice you can't give an answer to that question.
You started this session, you were saying that online gambling is fast growing. It is not fashion, it is not trend, it's hard reality. Are there still regulators that think this is a trend?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, I think that in all the member states you see that there is a sense that you have to do something. Doing nothing is not an option. And if you do something, well, you have the options that we just discussed. I don't think it is so much the regulator, the gambling regulators. They are aware that something needs to be done or that you have to have a proper system in place. But obviously, a member state is more than only a regulator in the area of gambling. And it's also a political debate. And not all politicians have the same idea about how to regulate online gambling, and not so much in general terms, but also in detail. What regulators are aware of, obviously, but politicians may not always be aware of what's going on and how you can best regulate that.
As Norwegian, Rolf Sims, he said that this is a highly sensitive political area. How, to summarize, how is it to work on this action plan? Regarding the highly sensitive political.
No, it is extremely sensitive. There's a lot of passion involved. Of course, you're playing with people's lives on the one hand. The addiction, everything that is related to addiction is of course very sensitive and important. But you're also talking about, and it was referred to right now, with where do the revenues of gambling go to? Go to private purses, or is it going to the public? It's about vested interest. We have a lot of monopolies there who have always been in charge of their own business. And we've heard it before. Norsk Tipping giving this very interesting and very important presentation. It shows actually how sensitive and how difficult it is to find the right tune. But to work in that area is, of course, very exciting. Except that, it is sensitive, and we are not talking about one member state. We're having 28 member states, and we try to find a good atmosphere amongst all of them. That's not easy.
And it takes time.
And it takes
obviously.
time.
Harrie Temmink, I'm so glad that you chose to come to Oslo and to honor our conference. This is a token of our gratitude. I just learned that it's called minutes, visual minutes. Yeah. You should in the coffee break. You should take a look at what she has been doing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Give him a big applause. Now there's going to be coffee outside, just so open the doors and enjoy yourselves.